The Unholy Trinity Tour. Aaron Ra, Matt Dillahunty, and Seth Andrews. If I can get this thing to shut off. Okay. Yes, I have been enthralled by the clips from these three people. They're so awesome. If you have not watched the clips, basically it's their speeches from the Unholy Trinity Tour, you really need to. But what I have done, and of course I'm just filming my computer screen, so it looks crappy. If you want to see quality, go to the clips and watch them yourself. But yes, I have basically made a little collage of the three guys and what I thought were really awesome points, which was pretty much their entire speeches because they're so good. But I just kind of jumbled them together, and I might make some comments kind of throughout, but not very many and not very long, because anything I say will only detract from the awesomeness of these guys and what they have to say. So here are some clips that I put together of this awesome Unholy Trinity Tour.
I kind of doubt that the Bible would ever have to be voted on. The canonization of Scripture, the canonization of Bible books. Which ones were chosen? Which ones were voted on? Why would God's definitive word ever have to be voted on by us, right? I doubt that makes sense. I doubt there's a conspiracy of scientists in this world who are all sort of colluding together to kill God. Scientists get famous by proving other scientists wrong. Scientists challenge it, they're the hardest on each other. I kind of doubt that it's normal to take part in the act of communion. We did this once a month in the church when I was growing up. Don't forget, next Sunday's Communion Sunday, everybody. So pray and get your heart right with Jesus. Bring the kids out. We're going to ritualistically drink our Father's blood and eat His flesh. What the fuck? Right? But it was normal. What about the Catholics who believe in transubstantiation, right? The miracle occurs and it actually becomes His flesh. I doubt the morality of Jesus, who said, I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. I've come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. You must love me more than them, even if it makes them your enemy. Is that benevolence? Here's a great verse that shows you the true nature of God. Not the cherry-picked cafeteria plan verses we hear about in Vacation Bible School, but the true nature of God. Out of Leviticus, these people are not qualified to approach God with their offerings. You can't have a blemish. You can't be blind or lame. No, no. You can't have a flat nose, or have anything superfluous, or be broken-footed or broken-handed, or have a crooked back, or be a dwarf. Small people, not allowed. You can't have a blemish in your eye, or be scurvy or scabbed, or have your stones broken. No, no, no. In order to approach Yahweh, to be worthy, you must be one of People Magazine's 100 Most Beautiful.
That you can prove that this is false. And it doesn't matter how obviously or how eloquently you do that. Once these people have been thoroughly indoctrinated, their logical sensors selectively shut down. And it may not be possible to ever reason with them again where this subject is concerned. Now,
I looked at even the first chapter of the book of the Bible, and when I examined it without making it a love letter, without my God glasses, when I decided I was going to take an honest look, I saw lots of opportunities for doubt. God created the light and the darkness, and He separated them on the first day, Genesis chapter 1. But in verses 16 through 19, God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, the lesser light to govern the night. That was the fourth day. Now a day is a period of 24 hours as a unit of time, reckoned from one midnight to the next, corresponding to the rotation of the earth on its axis as it rotates around the sun. If God didn't create the sun till the fourth day, how would 4 days already pass? I'd missed that one in Sunday school and vacation Bible school. Genesis 1. God called the light day, the darkness he called night on the first day. Without a sun? The creation of the sun, chapter 14, and he also made the stars. But the sun is a star. So if he'd already made the sun, how could he have then created the stars? He created two great lights, but wait a minute. The moon is not a light, it is a reflector of light. It doesn't generate any light. That's not a creation of light. In Genesis chapter 1, he created the heavens and the earth. Verse 1. Verse 14, the sun, moon, and stars were created. Well, wait a minute. Between those 14 verses, what constituted the heavens? That's odd. I kind of doubt that makes sense. And then you feel guilt. Anyone here know the guilt that comes when you start to doubt, right? It's a lack of faith. It's a lack of faith. It's an attack. It's an attack. I need to be a better Christian. I should pray more. I should read the Bible more. The problem is me. Genesis 1:26. God created male and female, Adam and Eve. He created them at the same time. But hang on just a second. Genesis chapter 2. The Lord said, it's not good for the man already created to be alone. So he formed out of the ground all the wild animals and all the birds of the sky, and he brought them to the man to see what he would name them. Whatever the man called each living creature, that was its name. So he named them all. Livestock, birds, all the wild animals. But for Adam no suitable helper was found. So then the Lord God caused the man to fall into a deep sleep, and while he was sleeping, he took his rib and he made the woman and presented her. Now, Adam was alone in chapter 2, where in chapter 1, they were created together.
Running into this problem of I don't know. And it's also where we really started to hit on the anti-science. Now, I have no problem with ignorance. Ignorance can be fixed with education. That's the whole purpose of what I do. It's what Aaron does. It's what Seth does. It's what teachers do. That's the whole purpose. I hate willful ignorance. And more than that, I despise the joyous celebration of willful ignorance and encouraging other people to stay ignorant, which was what was on parade all weekend. They couched it in terms of, hey, we're not anti-science, as long as it agrees with us. The exact same thing that Aaron was talking about. Over and over again, they kept saying, hey, we're not like those other Christians. We don't believe in miracles. The miracles are done. You know, that happened in the past. Telling me you don't believe in miracles now doesn't really convince me that you're a rational human being. Because now what you're saying is, I don't believe there's actual miracles going on now that I could investigate or perhaps find some information about, but I believe these unsourced, anonymous, unconfirmable tales of miracles from long ago. Now, I know which one seems more reasonable to me, but to them, the fact that they don't believe that miracles are occurring is great. Several times, one of the preachers came up to tell me, hey, I don't know what you think about Church of Christ, but we don't believe in ghosts. Well, good for you. Now get rid of that other stuff that you believe too. It's not special. And while I'm picking on the Church of Christ folks, there are going to be, as I mentioned earlier, people from other religions saying, oh, yeah, wait. Because Church of Christ, they're young earth in a big way. This is where the anti-science started. They don't. The other churches say, hey, we're not like them. We don't believe in a young earth. But we believe those same unsourced, unconfirmable miracle stories. Because you have to. If you disregard all that, you're done. You don't have any religion left. There's no Savior, no resurrection, no bread and fishes and loaves and walking on water. Now, I'm not saying you necessarily have to believe all of that. Each denomination is going to disagree on every single point of doctrine. But this anti-science celebration of willful ignorance got to the point where it was more than I could bear. My wife went with me on Saturday. and I had claw marks in my wrist from where she would reach over and grab every time they'd say something. Because they would get up and not just be anti-science while pretending that they were pro. They would mock scientists with their fancy letters after their last name, trying to be all elitist and making us think that we're not on their level. You're not! Doesn't mean they're right and you're wrong. We can talk about the facts and determine it later, but it is a fact. You are not on their level. These are people who spent their entire lives studying something that was built by people who spent their entire lives studying something which was built on things that other people studied for their entire lives on back. Doesn't mean that they're going to be right and that everything they say is right. That's an argument from authority. That's a fallacy. I get that. But if your objection is that they're all elitists because you're not on their level, and meanwhile you're talking about talking snakes and a literal 6,000-year-old earth, you are not on their level.
God said, I will make a suitable helper for him, and then he started with the animals and said, well, shit, that didn't work out. Wouldn't an omniscient deity have known in advance that there was no suitable helper? I shall create perfectly matched pairs of everything else. And Adam gave names to all the cattle and the fowl of the air and to every beast of the field. Wait a minute, there's an estimated 8.7 million species on the earth. To date, all of modern science has only named or categorized 1.2 million of them, and Adam named them in a day? I kind of doubt that's viable. Who named this guy? This is the giant spider crab. He lives at 300 meters, almost 1,000 feet. Adam held his breath and swam his ass down there and said, spider crab. I doubt that makes sense. What about the disorder of creation? Take a look at Genesis chapter 1 and 2. Now, this is rudimentary for many of you, but bear with me because I understand that many are hearing some of this information or seeing it in context for the first time, right? In chapter 1, it's the water, then the plants. But in chapter 2, he creates the plants, then the water. Chapter 1, animals, then birds, and then Adam and Eve together. Chapter 2, it's Adam, animals, then Eve. Genesis 2:7 said God made Adam from the dust of the ground. But if the previous verse said the entire earth was covered in water, where was their dust coming from? What the flip is up with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? Right? Why place it in the path of two naive children? Why allow the serpent into the garden? Why didn't God intervene when the serpent began to tempt Eve? Why wouldn't God want his kids to have the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil? When they were busted, why was the first reaction to cover up their genitals? And is it justice that original sin punishes generations who hadn't yet been born? Now, God is omniscient, knowing everything. Meaning, before he ever breathed the cosmos into existence, he saw the fail of the Adam and Eve, the Garden of Eden, the Genesis account.
The definition of delusion is a persistent false belief that is maintained despite indisputable evidence to the contrary, to falsely claim something when there is evidence otherwise. And I know a theist who describes his own position thus: I have evidence that A exists, but I choose to believe B. Although everything points to A, I'm going with B. And according to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, what makes these beliefs delusional is that they don't change when the person is giving conflicting information. The beliefs remain fixed even when the facts contradict them. And this debilitating mindset is much more common than you might imagine. Every creationist organization there is posts a statement of faith as if this were something to be proud of, wherein they admit that they assume their conclusions at the onset for reasons that have nothing to do with factual information, and more importantly, where they refuse to ever admit when they're wrong. Each of these organizations announces that they will automatically and thoughtlessly reject without consideration any and all evidence that might ever arise should it conflict with their interpretation of Bronze Age folklore. And mind you, no scientific organization would participate in anything so Orwellian, so biased, and so dishonest as this. And if truth mattered more than whatever you prefer to believe, this wouldn't be necessary, and it wouldn't be included. But among creationists, truth is irrelevant.
They would mock scientists with their fancy letters after their last name, trying to be all elitist and making us think that we're not on their level. You're not! Doesn't mean they're right and you're wrong. We can talk about the facts and determine it later, but it is a fact. You are not on their level. These are people who spent their entire lives studying something that was built by people who spent their entire lives studying something which was built on things that other people studied for their entire lives on back. Doesn't mean that they're going to be right and that everything they say is right. That's an argument from authority. That's a fallacy. I get that. But if your objection is that they're all elitist because you're not on their level, and meanwhile you're talking about talking snakes and a literal 6,000-year-old Earth, you are not on their level.
Excerpts from some of the leading creationist organizations in 2005. Here's the one for Answers in Genesis Now. It says it is imperative that people believe that the Bible is the absolute infallible truth and the supreme authority on all matters. That's the assertion of unreasonable conviction. If you scroll to the bottom of this page, the last bullet point still says, by definition, no apparent or perceived or claimed evidence in any field, including history and chronology, can be valid if it contradicts the scriptural record. And there is the admission that they have already rejected all the evidence there could ever be, no matter what we may discover in the future or how conclusive that is. In other words, no matter how true the truth really is, no amount of proof will ever change their minds. But hey, if you're prepared to believe that 2 + 2 = 5, then you're prepared to believe anything but the truth.
Snake. Who created that? The serpent was more crafty than any of the animals the Lord God had made. God created the mechanism that led to the fall of Eve and Adam. Who created evil? Colossians 1, for in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. If you go to Isaiah, I form the light and create darkness, I make peace and create evil. Why would God, who is the ultimate good, create evil? I doubt that makes sense. Even Francis Collins, who's been involved with the Human Genome Project and is still a Bible-believing Christian, said this. They said that anatomically modern humans emerged from primate ancestors perhaps 100,000 years ago, long before the Genesis time frame, and originated with a population that numbered something like 10,000, not 2 individuals. A scientist who believes in the Christian God has said that the Genesis account cannot account for the origins of humankind. The concepts of Adam and Eve as the literal first couple and the ancestors of all humans simply, quote, do not fit the evidence. And yet he is still a Bible-believing Christian. How does this happen? Well, he's wearing God glasses. How about another story in the book of Genesis that just makes your left eyebrow raise about this high? And it's one of the ones I like to lead with in a conversation about doubt. Hey, how did someone live to be 600 years old in a time period when most people live to be maybe 50? Hey, wait a minute. Why did God have to drown everybody? The unborn? I'm sorry, the unborn? Brand new babies, the deaf, mute, the mentally ill? How do they get their heads around concepts like fall, like the sin nature, corruption, all of those types of things? What did the animals do to piss God off? That doesn't make any sense. Why would he do that? And again, if he's omniscient, why did he not see that he would have to drown everybody horribly and come up with a better plan? He's God. He can do whatever he wants. How did 8 people, hundreds of years in age, create a football field-sized boat using only trees and pitch that housed animals that walked up to 8,000 miles from all over the world so that they could live for a year, right? How did this happen? Where were the food stores kept? What about the specialized diets for the specific animals? Meat for the carnivores? What about plant life for the herbivores? How was that kept fresh? How was it kept from spoiling? How did 8 people shovel thousands of tons of animal waste out of a 450-foot long boat with one window in it? One window. Can you imagine the smell? Right? Why did Noah have to send a dove out to find land when he and God were talking in earlier verses? They were on speaking terms, right? He had to send a dove out to go look, to do some recon? It makes no sense. Hey, why did he bother to send the dove out to find land? The ark doesn't have a sail, a motor, or a rudder. It can't be steered. So they could have been 50 feet from land and it wouldn't have made a lick of difference. They'd have sailed right on by.
One of them was up there talking about what was going on and people appealing to God. And I don't remember the exact context of this, but he said 73% of all accidents involving falling objects are caused by gravity. I thought it was 100, but 94% of all statistics are pulled out of your butt right when you need them. And that's one of them. They objected because science is unreliable, because it changes. Yes. And what exactly is it that changes science? Oh yeah, more science. They have it in their head that science is telling them truths. But science doesn't make any claim to truth or absolute truth. Science builds theories and models that are the best current explanation for the facts that we observe in the universe, and it follows the evidence where it leads instead of leading the evidence towards your pre-drawn conclusion. They don't understand in their young earth mentality, which they went over and over and over again. Before I went, I asked Tracy, I was like, is this young earth creationism going to be a big deal? Well, it's not really a tenet of, the salvation, but yeah, they're young earthers, and I don't know how much they're going to bring it up. Oh, it was everywhere. They had a physicist come in, not to talk about the age of the earth, but I asked him, because I was dumbfounded. He's got a PhD in physics, hasn't done physics since the 70s. I wish he'd get back to it. And I said, okay, all these other folks here, they're young earthers, but come on now, you got a PhD in physics. Give me an age. Maybe 20,000 years? Are you kidding me? And I tried to explain to them that in order for the world to be as young as you think it is, it's not just, oh, we found some outliers in some radiometric dating, so I'm not going to believe what those fancy scientists are saying. You don't understand the dating methods at all. You don't understand how they overlap, how they're proved. We're so good at knowing that these things work that we can tell exactly how reliable they are. We have an error bar for each of these assessments. But if the world doesn't work this way, you have no MRIs. The same physics that control radioactive decay that allows us to date certain things is used in medical science, which you guys accept. That's the science that you're pro, and this one that disagrees with your holy book is the one that you're against. And the reason for that is they have one and only one authority, and this goes back to what Arn was saying, and that is the New Testament. And during the discussions, I asked lots and lots of difficult questions about how do you know this is reliable, and those of you who've seen the show, I've used my alien abduction scenario thing about, there's people living right here, right now that you can talk to who will tell you their alien abduction scenario. Not any more outlandish than miracles in the Bible, and their stories seem kind of consistent, yet you don't believe them. Why not? And instead of believing them, you're going to believe the tales from anonymous authors who most likely weren't eyewitnesses, and even if they were, we know eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable, and these people were trying to sell something, a religion, stories that have become legends, and you're going to believe those. Yes. And I was told, because they asked me, do you trust? And I may have misspoken during this thing because they heard me say that I don't trust anyone. And what I remember saying was something more along the lines of, I'm not going to trust anyone when it comes to things like these. that the mere fact that somebody tells me that they witnessed someone rise from the dead is in and of itself not sufficient to believing that it's true. Hume taught us to evaluate these things by asking whether it's more likely that the individual is deceived or attempting to deceive than that the event actually happened, and to reject the greater miracle. And so, while I'm happy to take your word for me when you tell me you have a pet dog, I'm not happy to take your word when you tell me you have the pet invisible dragon story.
Answers in Genesis mixes apologetics with pseudoscience. They've hired a bunch of apologists with legitimate scientific degrees so that they can create the illusion of equal credibility and so they can appear to argue from authority. It says on this page that they have a list to show that there are qualified scientists doing important research who still believe in the myths of the Bible. It's important to point out, though, that none of these people are doing important research in the field of creationism itself. That's not possible because there is no scientific data to support or imply that any of this obviously mythological nonsense is even true, and there is quite a hell of a lot to prove that it's not true. Now let's look at the sort of people they employ. These are geologists Andrew Snelling and Paul Garner discussing the fossil Acanthostega gunnari, which in my opinion is the ultimate transitional species. It is essentially the Darwin fish. But you can't have transitional species when you believe in created kinds, right? So Andrew Snelling says that Acanthostega can't be transitional because its limbs are securely connected to the vertebrae to support the animal's weight so that it is clearly designed for walking. Paul Garner says that Acanthostega can't be a transitional species because its legs can't support its body weight out of water, so it is clearly designed for swimming. And the best way to argue the best way to know whether a transitional qualifies as such or not is when creationists can't agree and each say that it is 100% on either side of whichever line they want to devise. Now, let's look at what you have to do if you want to join the oxymoronic cult of creation scientists. You have to submit a signed copy of their statement of faith with your endorsement, promising to promote that. And you must follow that with your own testimony to promote Christianity regardless what the facts are. In addition, you also have to provide references from Bible-believing Christians, including at least one pastor. What you know about science doesn't matter. That's why many of the famous creationists with PhDs are dentists.
These people commit incest to create over 5,000 ethnic groups in 4,000 years. Yeah. These types of questions might, I don't know, lead to doubt.
5,000 ethnic groups in 4,000 years, created by 8 people. This might cause doubt, or if you're like some Christians, including me, you'll bust your ass trying to make that work somehow. You know, you'll imagine up some kind of intricate story, fill in the gaps for try to justify or come up with excuses for the stupid things in the Bible that make no sense at all. Fill in the gaps with your own explanations for the illogic, the glaring illogic. That's what either you doubt, or you're one of those Christians working overtime to try to make a piece of bullshit make sense.
What if you didn't have this desperate need to believe that is so overwhelming that it causes you to lie in defense of your truth? What if you had instead only a desire to understand and to find out what the truth really is, regardless what the truth might turn out to be? The purpose of science is to improve understanding. Creationism can't do that, because the only way to do that is to seek out the flaws in your current perspective and correct them. Now, if that is already your mindset, then you will assume less and inquire more. You'll be honest in your inquiry, and you won't likely believe anything on faith.
I think it takes courage. I really do. I think it takes courage to have the ability to value truth above everything, including what you want to hear. The warm and fuzzy reassurances that you want to hear, valuing what is actually true over the need to feel safe or the need to feel reassured. You know, if the facts point to an answer that is different from the warm and fuzzy answer that you want to hear, having the courage to accept those facts and not deny them or call them foolish or wrong just because they disagree with your warm and fuzzy answer that you want to hear. You know, I think it takes courage to not believe. I think it takes courage to be an atheist, and I think it takes honesty to be an atheist, because an atheist is somebody who appreciates the truth. They appreciate whatever the truth is, no matter what it is, including the fact that we most likely all cease to exist one day, and whether or not that's a happy answer, it is a very likely answer, because that's what the evidence points to. It doesn't point to some preconceived, oh, this is what we want the answer to be, so we're going to manipulate, you know, science to point to our little answer. It's not that way at all. It's like, well, here's all the evidence and it points to this answer, and oops, it's not the one we wanted to hear, but it is the one that's most likely true.
They literally told me that if you find the gospel authors credible in other areas, then you have to take their word for the extraordinary areas as well. Every con artist and grifter just doubled over in laughter as soon as they said that, because that is the definition of gullibility. To trust someone implicitly because they've been truthful or accurate to the best of your ability to find out in some other area. I don't normally talk about my family and my mom, but my mom wrote me a letter once. She's not Church of Christ. But she said, honey, I just want to let you know there is a Jesus. Your mom wouldn't lie to you. And they don't see the problem. I don't think my mom's lying to me. I think she's not actually saying what is true. The truth is, she believes there's a Jesus. And so she's relaying that information to me as honestly as she can. But she's portraying it as if it's a fact in and of itself. I tried to talk to him about extraordinary claims and how they require extraordinary evidence, and how you need to set up a burden of proof that if you believe something until it's proven wrong, you're going to be forced to believe many competing and contradictory things. And instead, if you wait and reserve belief until such time as belief is actually deserved and warranted by the evidence, you're going to be on much more solid footing.
These types of questions might, I don't know, lead to doubt. We have to talk about the morality of God. I doubt it's moral to drown the planet. And why the elaborate ruse of the flood? He could have vaporized everybody and simply started over. Why this Rube Goldberg mechanism, right? Where the fresh waters come down and mix with the salt waters and those brackish waters. It doesn't kill all the ocean and lake life. I don't get any of that. And the morality of doing it to begin with. Here's a great example. This is Jeffrey Dahmer. He killed 17 people. He's a monster in society's eyes, especially the Christian culture. God kills the entire planet. We call him Lord. Jeffrey Dahmer accepted Jesus before he was killed in prison. According to that, he is in heaven today. The lady on your right is Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who has escaped oppressive Islamic cultures. She escaped Islamic oppression and now fights for human rights, specifically women's rights, all around the world. And she goes to hell. I doubt that's moral. What do you think? I doubt it makes sense. For you to be horribly injured on God's watch in a car wreck, you call 911, the paramedics come, you have an invasive operation, you get round-the-clock care, prescription medications developed by scientists, you take weeks, months, or years to recover, and then thank God for saving your life. Here's a great cartoon. It says, I swear, if anyone thanks God after this, I'm putting the tumor back in. Is there anybody here who works in the medical or healthcare profession? Everybody else, would you applaud these fine people? Thank you.
What if that would have always been your natural tendency, but you've been inculcated in some other philosophy since childhood? In the world of creationists, there are only the deceivers and the deceived. And in that latter set are many innocents who are naturally curious, but they've been raised like mushrooms, in that they've been kept in the dark and fed only bullshit. It's not always impossible to reason with such people, and it's worth the effort. Because some of our best advocates of science and rationalism and our most outspoken anti-theists were former believers. Because once they realize how they've been methodically lied to all their lives, they are justifiably outraged.
No, it's not hopeless. Although knocking things off my desk. Oh, yes, my expensive camera. It's not hopeless, and that's why I make videos, and that's why I rail against people who walk in delusion. And people say, well, you should just let them have their delusion. What does it hurt? What is the harm? The harm is a stolen life, a life that never truly got to be their life. That is the harm. Is that a great harm? Yes. I think it's a great harm. And that's just one of the many harms that the cult does. Not only does it take away somebody's life, it detracts from people's ability to enjoy their life, understand their world and their place in it, but it takes away their chance, their one chance to fully know themselves, their one chance to fully grow as who they are supposed to be, who they were born to be. And that's just one of the things that this cult does that I believe is harmful. So yes, there is a reason, there is a point to speaking an alternate message, saying something that isn't what people always want to hear, singing off tune, even if it's annoying to those people that want to hear the same la 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 la, singing off tune. Because you know what? When you have a choir of singers and the one person that's off tune, that's the one everybody hears. That's the one that stands out. And guess what? That's what we need to do. We need to sing off key. We need to sing it loud, because then we will be heard. And it will not be the message that the cult wants them to hear. So, yeah, I think it's worthwhile what we're doing on YouTube. And when atheists speak out, I think it's a good thing.
Danny Moody goes on Twitter and he posts a picture of Bible pages and says, "This landed on my truck. In the midst of a chaotic tornado, my God still delivers." Now, I am not trying to trod upon the grief of the grieving. And I always try to say that when I bring this example up. But somebody's got to say it. I doubt that makes sense. God ignored 7 screaming children. There were actually many, many more. 7 drowned in Plaza Towers Elementary School as the twister hit them at the end of the school day. 7 children drowned and were horribly killed. But God saved a few pieces of paper? I'm reminded of this meme from the Betty Bowers site. Thanking God for sparing you in a natural disaster is a bit like sending a thank you note to a serial killer for stabbing the family next door.
Because the Bible's really, really clear about it, and nobody agrees with what the Bible actually says about it. I went through some of the passages, brought up my objections to slavery, and boy, the apologetics that I got were amazing. Hi, people. I'll say hi to you people. Well, I think that God was giving those instructions about slavery and how you can only beat them a little bit so that eventually we would understand that slavery was wrong and get rid of it. God was kind of doing a soft play way of getting rid of slavery. No! If you're God, you can just say, don't have slaves. If it's easy enough for God to say, don't murder people, don't lie, don't covet your neighbors, why was it so damn hard to say, thou shalt not own another human being as property? What kind of weak-ass God do you have that he's got to, well, y'all are keeping slaves, don't beat them too bad. Then it was claimed that I misunderstood or misrepresented the scripture. Well, that was a mistake, because then I read it. If your opponent gets a chance, is going to be able to speak after you're done, and you say that they misrepresent something, you better be right. And then they came back and said, well, the Bible correctly understood means this. And by way of an example, I talked about, there's a passage where during the plagues, and God is trying to get his people free, and the Pharaoh keeps saying, okay, I give up, I'll let you go. And then it says literally, God hardened Pharaoh's heart. And they said, no, God didn't actually do that. He just allowed Pharaoh to harden his own heart. Well, in the verse before that, it says Pharaoh was ready. Go ahead, take your people, get out, I'm scared, terrified, you win. And then it literally says, God hardened Pharaoh's heart. And I said, so what you're telling me is the literal reading of God hardened Pharaoh's heart, correctly understood, means God didn't harden Pharaoh's heart. Maybe we should be murdering people. Thou shalt kill. I mean, if we can actually reverse something and have it be correctly interpreted at that point, is anything out of bounds? Well, then they came back and said, well, the slavery was actually for the good of these slaves. You see, these were prisoners. And we've got to get them to know God. So it was good for them to be prisoners. And they likened it to incarceration. All the audio is out on their internet. It was a mess. And I pointed out to them, and this seemed to sink in on Sunday night, that if you're going to point to the Bible as the good book, which it's not, if you're going to point to it as your moral guidebook, I can write a more moral book than the Bible. I can write a better moral guide than the Bible. And I'm saying this from their pulpit in their church. And I can prove it to everybody here right now. Because I could rewrite the Bible word for word and change the allowance of slavery to a prohibition of slavery, and the book would already be better. We could do a lot more than that. And that's what the rest of us who aren't beholden to one book have been doing. So what were the results from this particular weekend from hell? I had a conversation with the pastor after it was over with, and he wanted to give me some advice about how to not be condescending.
Would create 100 billion galaxies so that you and I could be the center of the universe. I kind of doubt that. Matt, and I will steal from Matt wherever he is, he said he doubts God's master plan, a master plan that would create 100 billion galaxies so he could place his beloved children on a tiny rock in a remote corner of it and send most of them to hell. I kind of doubt that.
It's not always impossible to reason with such people, and it's worth the effort. Because some of our best advocates of science and rationalism and our most outspoken anti-theists were former believers. Because once they realize how they've been methodically lied to all their lives, they are justifiably outraged.
I doubt the morality of the story of Abraham and his sacrifice of his son, or almost sacrifice. I use this story as a test when I'm talking to people in the faith. And I say, do you admire Abraham as God's servant? Absolutely. We should all follow his example. If God appeared to you and he said, take one of your children, and I often will ask them one of their children's names. Give me one of your children's first name. Timmy, all right? God told you to take Timmy out into the backyard and lay him out on the picnic table and take a kitchen knife and drive it into his chest and execute him to prove yourself to him. Prove your faith. Would you do it? And believe it or not, I have had a few people say, yes. The email I received was, "It is not wise to anger God. These people scare you." But to their credit, the vast majority of even hardcore Bible-believing Christians said, "Forget it. I won't ever harm my child. I would rather receive judgment from God than lay a hand of harm to my child." And I stop them and I say, "Congratulations. You just proved two things. First of all, you do not gain your morality from God, right? You just made a moral decision outside of Him and His book, completely separate. The second thing is, you are more moral than God."
But as I was driving home, the passage about pitting brother against brother and coming to sow destruction rang through my head, because what we heard on Monday is that people in the church have been going to the elders to say, "Why'd you bring this guy down here? He's been making better points than our guy." And on Monday morning, when I wasn't originally supposed to be there, but I came down anyway, the speakers got up and they were like, "There are some people who think that Matt made better points this weekend, and we'd just like to remind you that this is about engaging in conversation and opening your mind and considering things. It's not an adversarial process with a winner and a loser." And then the person that I debated got up and from the pulpit chastised the congregation and the elders and his brother for saying that it wasn't an adversarial process with a debater, with a winner and a loser, and how dare they remotely suggest that Matt made better arguments than he did. And then his brother, who's the main preacher, got up and said, no, hang on, this doesn't have to be adversarial. So I've got these in the church on Monday morning. I also had people from the church emailing me, asking me for advice. One of them was asking me for advice about sex, which I loved because we didn't talk about that all weekend. And what that shows is that there was a little breakthrough. There was a point where this person who is in this rigid, structured church with one and only one authority was willing for a moment to step out and seek some other authority. And that's how falling away from religion happens. It happens in little bitty steps. The takeaway from all of this is don't buy into the idea that debates and conversations are pointless. They can't reason somebody out of something that they weren't reasoned into, because they were, in fact, reasoned into it, just with really bad reasons. Oh, you can't talk to these people, they're thick. You can't talk to these people, they're silly. They believe stuff, they're never going to give it up. Some of them may not, some of them may. Everywhere I go, every lecture I give, there are people who come up and say, thank you so much. What you guys have done on your show helped change my life. I used to be a believer. I used to be an agnostic. I used to not be a skeptic, any number of things. When I was here 2 years ago for the debate with Abdu Murray, I got an email shortly after from a young person, 13 at the time, who let me know that her parents had exposed her to a bunch of different positions and, allowing to make up their own mind. And that after that debate, she now identified as an atheist. We're reaching people. It's all possible. The nuns are the fastest growing religious group, although how much of a group we are is up for debate, that there is. It's not futile. As my friend Keith Lowell Jensen, a comedian, has people raise their hands. How many of you were ever religious? Raise your hand. And how many of you were benefited from people arguing and debating about religion in order to get you out? I think we were worth talking to. That's Keith's line. Keith thinks we were worth talking to. I do too, which is why I do this. I used to joke that I did it for penance. I don't. I do it because I want to change the world. I do it because this stuff matters. I do it because that church in San Antonio has a group of people who are being intentionally misled. And I don't mean that the individuals are lying in the sense that they don't believe what they're saying. They do. But they've begun with presuppositions about the one and only authority being the New Testament. Anything that doesn't agree with it gets thrown out. And as Arn pointed out, that's still a lie. And if they're teaching their kids this, even if their kids are getting a good education, they're undermining. And I care about what kind of world I leave behind. Why would you care about that? You're going to be dead. It doesn't matter. Because I do. Because people who came before me cared about what kind of world they left behind. I benefited from Hume and Voltaire and Robert Greene Ingersoll. And I want other people to have even more access to information so that we don't have to, maybe in 50, 100, 200 years, this will be nonsense. Nobody will come down and hear this stuff. Nobody will go out and have arguments because we'll be done with it. Yeah, religion's never going to entirely go away, but if we can get it to a point where it cannot influence our lives, where religion is, P.Z. Myers likened it to knitting, as a hobby. When not just the young earthers and the flat earthers are scoffed and mocked, but anybody who's advocating the supernatural, which it doesn't have evidence for, are ostracized. I don't want them to necessarily be excluded. I want their ideas excluded, which encourages them to come along with the rest of us to the future. Because the future is amazingly promising as long as we don't screw it up. And the one thing that's most likely going to make us screw it up is irrational thinking rooted in superstition and religion. And I'll keep debating till it kills me. Thank you.
Sorry, my computer shut off there at the end of Matt's speech. That's what it does. It screensaver. Anyway, powerful speeches by three very intelligent, observant, insightful men. I'm very glad that they are on this earth, and I'm very glad for what they do. So this is just me saying thank you to them and trying to get what I see as words of wisdom out as much as I can for people who might have missed the or maybe they're afraid to watch a video called the Unholy Trinity Tour. Anyway, if you've been watching, thanks. Bye!